April 22nd, Medina Lake held 9,892 acre-feet of water, 3.9% of what the lake was built to hold. That was 90 days ago. As of July 22nd, it holds 71,107 acre-feet. And the surface came up almost 21 feet in a single week, after roughly 480 billion gallons of rain fell across the Texas Hill Country. San Antonio called it a recovery. The engineers who have been measuring this lake since 1912 call it something else, because the fuller Medina Lake gets, the faster it drains itself into the ground underneath San Antonio. On July 15th, Medina Lake sat at 12.9%, holding 32,759 acre-feet. 7 days later, it read 27.9% and 71,107 acre-feet. The lake more than doubled in a week. The surface climbed from 998.99 feet above sea level to 1,019.85 feet, a rise of almost 21 feet of water across a basin that spreads into two Texas counties, Bandera and Medina. 1 year ago, on July 22nd of 2025, the same lake sat at 6.3%. None of this came out of nowhere. 2026 has been clearly wetter across south-central Texas since early April, with things getting better for lakes and aquifers well before July. Medina Lake had already been climbing before the storm hit. It reached its highest level in years on nothing but normal spring rain, and then July arrived and moved it more in 5 days than the previous 5 months combined. Local coverage has been careful with the word recovery, and for good reason. The people quoted in it are choosing what one reporter called careful hope because they have watched this lake come back before. The storm that did it was not gentle. Rain fell across the hill country between July 13th and July 17th. Creeks and rivers came up across the region from the border with Mexico to Interstate 35. There were evacuations around Uvalde. The governor signed a major disaster declaration for south-central Texas while the water was still rising. The aquifer underneath answered within days. The J17 index well in San Antonio, the single number the region watches to decide how tight water rules get, rose 11 feet in 1 week. Over at the Uvalde pool, the rise was about 7 feet. Canyon Lake, northwest of New Braunfels, gained 15 feet in a matter of days. But here is the detail that tells the real story. Medina Lake did not only catch that water, it started giving it away. 113 years before that rise, the Medina River ran through a narrow limestone canyon in Bandera County with nothing across it. On November 16, 1910, a declaration of appropriation was filed on the river. An engineer named Dr. Fred Stark Pearson talked British investors into paying for a dam there. Construction started in November of 1911. A crew of 1,500 men worked in shifts around the clock and mixed 292,000 cubic yards of concrete into a wall 164 feet high, 128 feet wide at its base, 25 feet across the top, and 1,580 feet long. The pour ran without stopping for months to close a wall that size across a river canyon. Planned filling of the lake began on May 7, 1913. The State Board of Water Engineers turned the filing into Certified Filing Number 18 on February 14, 1914. The leaking showed up in the records almost right away. By 1912, before the lake had even finished filling, records were already tracking water disappearing out of the basin, not over the spillway, not down the river, straight down. That question never went away. In July of 1995, the Texas Water Development Board sent a survey crew out to measure Medina Lake and Diversion Lake from the water, mapping the basin floor and rebuilding the height, area, and capacity charts the whole system is judged against. The original charts dated back to 1913. 82 years is a long time to run a lake on a number nobody had checked. The company that built it did not last long either. The Medina Valley Irrigation Company failed and was handed to the courts in 1917, then was made over into a public water district. On November 1, 1979, that district took on wider powers and took the name it still uses, the Bexar-Medina-Atascosa County's Water Control and Improvement District No. 1. The dam held, the lake never has. The same limestone that gave Pearson a narrow, deep, cheap place to put a wall is the exact reason the lake behind it cannot keep what it catches. Now zoom out. Medina Lake collects runoff from a drainage area of 634 square miles across the Edwards Plateau. At full conservation pool, height 1,064.2 feet. The lake covers roughly 5,600 acres and stretches about 18 miles long and 3 miles across at its widest point. Its deepest water is listed at around 152 feet. On paper, it is a serious reservoir with a conservation capacity of 254,823 acre-feet. The dam itself tops out at 1,076.2 feet, with spillway tops at 1,064.5 and 1,072.3. Down at the other end of the scale sits a height of 912.2 feet. That is dead pool, the level where water can no longer move out of the lake at all. Between those two numbers is the entire working life of this reservoir, and for most of the last decade it has lived down near the bottom of that range. There is a small detail buried in the gauge records that says a lot about how this place is run. The federal gauge reports height against a national zero point. The water district that owns the lake uses its own zero point, set 7.81 feet higher. So the same water surface has two official heights depending on which agency is describing it. Just below the dam sits Diversion Lake, a smaller pool that catches what Medina releases and feeds the canal system. In every serious study of this system, the two lakes get measured as one unit, because water leaving Medina does not necessarily leave the ground. The problem is what the water is sitting on. Medina Dam, Medina Lake, and the smaller Diversion Lake just below it were all built partly on exposed Edwards limestone. That limestone is the soak-in zone for the Edwards Aquifer, the water supply that roughly 2 million people in and around San Antonio drink from. Limestone in this part of Texas is not solid rock in any useful sense. It is eaten through with cracks, gaps, and open channels, and it takes water the way dry sand takes rain. Texas Public Radio put it in one line this month. Medina Lake's leaky bottom drains into the Edwards Aquifer even when full. Even when full. That is the part that changes the whole story. Here is how it works in plain terms. Picture a bucket with holes drilled up the side, spaced from the bottom to the rim. Fill it an inch deep, and only the lowest hole is underwater, so the leak is slow. Fill it halfway and a dozen holes are underwater, all draining at once, and the weight of the water above them is pushing harder. Fill it to the top and every hole is working. The bucket does not leak at a fixed rate. It leaks faster the fuller it gets. Medina Lake is that bucket, and the holes are limestone. That is not a loose comparison. It is the shape of what they actually measured, and the United States Geological Survey has spent 70 years proving it. The agency has put instruments on this system across 4 separate study periods: March of 1955 through August of 1964, October of 1995 through September of 1996, March of 2001 through June of 2002, and March of 2017 through October of 2022. 4 windows, spread across 3 generations of water scientists, all pointed at the same question: where does the water go and how fast? The 1995 and 1996 window produced daily numbers. Losses from Medina Lake into the Edwards and Trinity aquifers ranged from negative 14 acre-feet per day up to 135 acre-feet per day. Diversion Lake ran from negative 1.2 up to 93.1. Together, the two lakes moved between 36.1 and 119 acre-feet into the ground on a given day. The range is wide for one reason. It tracks the height of the water, and that was only one of the 4 study windows. And if the volume numbers were the only evidence, you could argue about method. So they went and traced the water itself. Researchers ran isotope tests on lake water, river water, and samples from selected Edwards and Trinity wells, measuring amounts of deuterium, oxygen, and strontium. The point was to follow the chemical fingerprint of Medina Lake water and find out what share of the water in a given San Antonio area well came out of that reservoir. You can argue with a budget calculation. It is harder to argue with an isotope. In 2025, the agency published the study that pulled all of it together, a water budget study of the Medina and Diversion Lake system covering 1955 through 2022. R.N. Slattery of the United States Geological Survey, lead author of that report, and his co-authors built a new formula for one specific purpose: to predict how much water leaves the lake into the ground using nothing but the lake's stage, its height. Stage goes up, soak-in goes up. That link is now written into a published federal formula. The numbers attached to it are not small. An earlier United States Geological Survey water budget put the average loss from this system at about 3,083 acre-feet every month. The 2025 report calculated 225,400 acre-feet of soak in between March of 2017 and September of 2022, a stretch of about 66 months. Run that division and the average lands near 3,400 acre-feet a month, leaving through the floor. Medina Lake is currently holding 71,107 acre-feet total. You would think a lake that leaks by design would be the headline every time it rains. It never is. The new formula was also tested against the old ones, and the results say something about how long this has been misread. The 2025 formula estimated 224,310 acre-feet against a calculated 225,400, missing by about 0.5%. A method published back in 1978 estimated 342,080 acre-feet for the same period, coming in about 52% too high. That is not a rounding difference. That is a 50-year-old guess about a drinking water supply being off by more than half. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything about the last 7 years. When the lake was sitting at 3.9% in April, the water surface was down around 976.85 feet. Most of the limestone that leaks was high and dry, out in the open air, doing nothing. The lake could barely leak because there was almost nothing left to leak with. Now the surface is back above 1,019 feet. 43 feet of once dry limestone is underwater again, and all of it is open for business. The rain refilled the lake. It switched the drain back on at the same time. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water crises, earth science events, and geography news as they happen with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. By July 23rd, the United States Geological Survey gauge at the lake read 1,020.18 feet, still creeping up. Still 44 feet below the conservation pool height the dam was designed to hold. To fill the rest of the way, Medina Lake needs another 183,716 acre-feet. Put the leak against the storage and the math gets uncomfortable. At the long-term average of roughly 3,400 acre-feet a month moving into the ground, 71,107 acre-feet is about 21 months of leaking. That is the generous version, because it assumes nobody irrigates, nothing evaporates, and the leak stays at its average instead of speeding up the way the published formula says it does at higher stage. It is a top limit, not a prediction, and it still comes out under 2 years. Now follow what that water touches on its way down. First, the farms. Medina Lake was built as an irrigation lake, and delivering water to farmland across Bexar, Medina, and Atascosa counties is still the core of the job. In February of this year, with the lake at 4.4%, the district was running under Stage 4 rules. Stage 4 is not a suggestion. It is the point where an irrigation district starts telling farmers how much of their share they are not getting this season, on ground where the crop decisions were made months earlier. A refill in the third week of July arrives late for a lot of those decisions. Fields were planted, or not planted, back when the lake read single digits. Second, Bandera County. The Bandera County River Authority and Groundwater District had its drought level listed as exceptional this February, and issued new limits on watering and well use on February 5th. Lakefront property in that county spent years staring at cracked mud. Boat ramps ended in dirt 100 yards from the waterline. Businesses that exist because the lake exists were running on a lake that was, in practice, a river running through a canyon. This month, for the first time in years, a boat on a trailer at the top of a Bandera County ramp can be backed into actual water. Nobody down there is calling it fixed. Third, the aquifer. Every acre-foot that leaves Medina Lake through the limestone is not really gone. It becomes soak-in for the Edwards Aquifer and the upper zone of the Trinity Aquifer. That is why the J17 well responded so fast. Looking at the region's water books, you could call that a win. From the point of view of anyone in Bandera or Medina County who needs surface water in a lake, it is the reason the lake never stays. That split is the quiet tension underneath this entire story. Two counties need the water to sit in the basin where boats float and canals fill. A metro area of 2 million needs it to go through the floor and into the wells. The limestone has already picked a side, and it picked it in 1913. Fourth, San Antonio. 2 million people draw from the Edwards. The study that produced the 2025 soak-in formula was funded together with the San Antonio Water System and the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Those two agencies paid to keep the stream gauges running because they need to know exactly how much of the city's water arrives by way of a leaking irrigation lake 16 miles southeast of Bandera. Fifth, the summer that has not happened yet. The rain stopped on July 17th. The National Weather Service forecast for the following week called for a ridge of high pressure holding in place, mostly sunny skies, and highs in the mid-90s. No rain in it. The clock on the next drop started the day the rain stopped, and nobody at the lake can hear it running yet. And the lake is now a much bigger target for the sun than it was in April. Surface area has gone from 723 acres on April 22nd to 1,362 acres on July 15th, to 2,395 acres on July 22nd. That is more than 3 times the water surface out in South Texas heat in 90 days at the start of watering season. Bigger lake, faster leak, more water lost to the sun, no rain in the forecast, all 4 running at once. And the lake is still small. At 2,395 acres of surface, it is covering under half the roughly 5,600 acres it holds at Conservation Pool. The headline number tripled. The lake on the ground is still less than half a lake. There is a built-in reason the swings are this extreme. A 634 square mile watershed is not large for a lake rated at 254,823 acre-feet. Medina Lake depends on storms landing in exactly the right place over a fairly narrow slice of the Edwards Plateau. When that happens, the lake gains faster than almost any lake in Texas. When it does not, there is no broad river system quietly topping it off in the background. It is feast, then a long stretch of nothing, on repeat. But the version of this running in the coverage right now is not the full picture, because Medina Lake has already run this exact play once, inside the last 11 years. In late 2014, the lake was about 90 feet below its conservation pool. Then, heavy rain hit the Medina River Basin. By May of 2015, the lake was above 46% and roughly 28 feet low, after being 90 feet low only months earlier. The comeback kept going. On June 1st, 2016, Medina Lake was 100% full and standing 1.5 feet above its conservation pool. Full, completely full, with water over the top of the height it was designed for. Records show the last time the lake stood at capacity was July 7th of 2019. By September of 2022, it was at 7.5%, sitting just above the record low set in May of 2014. By July of 2023, it was around 5%. In April of 2025, it reached what operators call dead pool at 2.5%, with flow out of the lake downstream stopped completely. On February 6th of this year, it read 4.4%. On June 22nd, 8.6%. Then 5 days of rain, and 27.9%. That is the pattern this lake has repeated since 1913. It fills fast when a storm parks over the right 634 square miles. It empties fast because the Medina River is not a big enough faucet to outrun a limestone floor with 2 aquifers underneath it. So the honest question is not whether Medina Lake came back this month. It did. The gauges are not unclear. The question is what 27.9% buys. How long does 71,107 acre-feet last against a leak that grows with depth, a watering season already running, and a forecast with no rain in it? What happens to the J17 well when the lake drops back below the working limestone and the soak-in from Medina shuts off again? If a 50-year-old method was putting this system's soak in 52% too high, what else in the region's water math is built on the old number? And if the last full lake was July of 2019, what does recovery mean for a basin that has now spent 7 years under the line? How many more storms of this size does it take? And how close together do they have to fall before the lake stops giving back more than it gets? The data does not answer those yet. The measurements only run one direction, forward, one reading at a time. 16 miles southeast of Bandera, the gauge on Medina Lake reports a new water surface height every hour, 1,019.86 feet at 7 in the morning, 1,019.94 at 11, 1,019.98 at 1 in the afternoon. And underneath all of it, in the dark, 43 feet of limestone that spent years dry is soaking again, passing hill country rainwater down through the cracks toward the wells of San Antonio, 1 hour at a time.